We will proceed now. Can I please have your attention? We will proceed now to the second panel. The title is How Can the Bretton Woods Institutions Be Reformed? We have three distinguished speakers. Haihong Cao, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing correctly. Director of Research in the Center for International Finance, Institute of World Economics and Politics, the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences in China. Jayati Chosh, Professor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, former professor at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, founding executive member of International Development Economics Associates, IDEAS. And then Leonardo Burlamaqui, Professor, State University of Rio de Janeiro, also Senior Fellow of the Brazilian Center for International Relations, and Research Fellow of the Levy Economics Institute in New York. Each one will have 15 minutes. So we can start with Haihong Cao. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be in the panel. And so I think this session is about institutions reform, and a lot of points already discussed in the previous session and even yesterday and the day before yesterday, the evening session. So I hope I can have something. No, it's nothing different, but just you know, if you think I contribute a little more, and then I'll be very happy. So this is about institutional reform, and so I think I want to you know, go back a little bit to brief history, because you know, the IMF and the World Bank were established 80 years ago. It's a very, very long time. Even the Bretton Woods system has long gone, and still the institutions are still there. We didn't talk about the dollar, but dollar, sure, is still there as well. But there are reasons why they still arrived. I think the key element is that they just keep, you know, up with, we call it, keep pace with time. Well, to some extent, but most of the time they are, you know, a little bit lag behind. And the key factor is, of course, crisis. I think the day, no, the day before yesterday's evening session, someone mentioned about that. Now, let me just, which one?
Yeah, just point in that direction.
Okay. Oh, yes. So this is very, very sketch of this. So just follow my talk the line. And I think, you know, before the collapse of Bretton Woods system, and the major innovation is, of course, creation of SDRs. And because it's you know, the reason is just, you know, supplement to dollar liquidity. And somehow, because of the SDR, we still discuss this, this SDR today, and it provided additional asset class to the central bank's COFA. Don't forget, it's assets class. And of course, it added additional risk management tools as well. So we almost forget about it. But somehow, I mean, this was very, very original, you know, purpose that SDR served. And then, of course, oil crisis, I didn't put it in the chart, and which IMF, we almost forget, because IMF was very active during that time. The Middle East is just a new emerging power. And then suddenly, you know, they can, you know, just mobilize the market, and oil price just, you know, gets sky higher. And then they create oil facility. This, which is very useful because, you know, during the time it's just the beginning of the floating exchange rate era, and basically the facility help to prevent competitive devaluation and trade restriction. Don't forget, those are the key functions of the IMF. And then, of course, you can see this chart already. I put it in the GDP growth rate. It's a very sketchy image. But anyway, along the line of crisis, of course, the 1980s Latin American crisis, IMF played a big role, but later on they got much criticism. And then Asia financial crisis, which is a big failure for the IMF. We talk about the Asia financial institutions, and also you mentioned, Professor Ocampo mentioned about Qingmai Initiative, which all the setup was because of the failure of the IMF during that time. And don't forget, Japan proposed Asian Monetary Fund right after the crisis. And the American strongly against it. China said nothing. And then this is we call it the red proposal put forward at the wrong time. Because, it's impossible without support of the IMF or the US, because US has veto power. But somehow, later on, some scholars reflect a little bit, and they realize that the IMF really, took note, because Japan was very much underrepresented in the IMF quota system. They calculate because Japan contributes a lot more to support Asian countries, even more than the IMF as a whole. So this is something, it's you say the power, but power sometimes comes along with money. So this is something happened in Asia financial crisis. And so Japan was really, really, active to promote this idea. And then because it's failed, but the idea doesn't just died. And then ASEAN Plus 3 is saved the Qingmai Initiative, although it never activated. But somehow we always treasure it as something for Asia. Asia, ASEAN is small countries together, but still they have a very powerful, growth path, in the history. So then 2008 financial crisis, this is, I think, it's a big moment for a change. This is not only because of the crisis, catastrophic damage, but also because, the emerging power. Of course, you can say China is always part of the story. If you talk about global imbalance, China is always on the other side, and American is on one side. So this is something, during that time, this power changes very quickly, and the consequence is so obvious. And then the whole global economy really just bent together. So I think that was the time we really got serious to reflect the pitfall of international monetary system. And then, the IMF really serious as well. And I think they realized that if you want to rebalance the economy, you have to take all the stakeholders at the table. You can't just talk to yourself. You have to talk to your partners. So this is something happened. The IMF very open. Voice reform, quota reform, and then end up with the major, the quota distribution and of course a lot of governance reform coming along. So this crisis basically, I always think this is a momentum of a cooperation, global cooperation. But of course, later on, there are a lot of things going on. I won't touch everything, but anyway, what I'm saying is that the crisis really creates an urgency for reform. And now, I think if the history can be any guide, for us now, I think we need to move faster because, basically we are in the middle of, someone called it a poly-crisis, even worse than before, because this time it's not only because financial, economical, or development, many climate, debt issues all come together, and most importantly, geopolitical tension play a role. So this is something that's quite different from the previous crisis. So, okay, I don't have much time, but I have, well, very quick, because you guys already discussed this. So just have some nice charts for your eyes. And you see this, something we should be done. Of course, we discussed this, resources for inclusive purpose. But normally this is a job for the MBDs, but MF is really in a position, they think about it, whether they need to expand a little bit their function. But this is something really debatable because they have the mandate. And it is very, very difficult to move too far if they want to provide this sort of tools for development purpose. But for low-income countries, I think the MF can do a lot more with those new tools. I think it's not, we don't have a very long time series about the new tools of the RST, but somehow which is really, really important because you link to SDR rechanneling. It's kind of resources to just they reshuffle a little bit within the institution, and then they create something new, open the door to more maybe donors or some contributors, and then attract more demand. And then you can see that the red one is Professor Obama mentioned about this is window, concessional window, which is really important for MF to keep up with the need for of the low-income countries. And SDR, I won't talk more about it. There are a lot of discussions, but you see that SDR is really I call it a sleeping beauty. It's just there, but you need to someone, to wake her up. And then I think this is not only just, we talk, we need to have someone really change their mind. There are a lot of discussions, the link with quota share, the allocation, or of course, the reduced distribution on a regular base. There are a lot of discussions. And then, this is something, very important because, the MF used to be very proud of this. MF used to be the only major liquidity supporter, apart from the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve is a completely different thing. But MF, as a global lender last resort, used to be the one, but now it's just one of them. This is really changing the picture because, the rise of the bilateral swaps, of course. Federal Reserve swap is still the most important one. There are many others. I just said a little bit Chinese central bank swap. This is something really, discussed in some other occasions. And then regional financial arrangement, which you can see that it has a larger share compared with the MF. They cover, the different areas, but a lot of spaces. Chiang Mai initiative in Asia didn't, do anything, but somehow now they get the momentum to change the conditionality because they link to the dollar program, which is really bad. And they want to have their local currency to boost the institution and link the surveillance body to the Chiang Mai initiative, multilateralism. So this is something going on. Last, I have 1 minute, okay, 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Very, very, very quick, because this is something you discussed already. You already mentioned a lot of details, but this I did nothing. This is just natural data from the MF. I can see that if this time last year, the end of last year, what if the 15th general quota review, they utilized the quota which formed in 2008. That could be a different picture, but somehow nothing happened. But I'm not saying that, this is something of a failure, but eventually the MF really got to really boost to its, capacity, because the MF, the overall resources really, it depends on the temporary borrowing arrangement, which is not in terms of legitimacy, there's a lot of, uncertainties attached to that. But now the IMF are more confident that it's kind of, they have a larger quota share. But anyway, some core issues is still untouched. The quota formula, the change of the formula is something going on, and they pledged they are going to change it. But I don't know what's going to happen, because there are a lot of discussions, very technical, sometimes political. And so this is something we just keep checking this path and in the next quarter review. So I'll stop there, but I just want to mention that some people raise the question of whether the IMF should be political neutral. I think this is a really good idea, but I just don't know how.
Jayat?
So much has been said of such importance and relevance that it's really hard to know what can possibly be said at this point. So forgive me if this is not a structured presentation. I'm really just responding to everything that I've been hearing over the last 1.5 days. And in a sense, what struck me is that you can think about changing the IFIs in two different ways. One is reforming them, and then there are the easy reforms and the hard reforms. And the other is to reimagine them. And I think we've got both positions already here. We've talked about different ways of reforming. And we heard yesterday from Prabhat Patnaik and Jan Kregel about really reimagining the institution in a completely different kind of world. So I'm not going to repeat. I mean, I think now all of us have really perhaps got an excellent overview about the kinds of reforms that we need in terms of the governance, the quota shares, the voting, the SDRs, which I think is absolutely crucial, the surcharges and how they should be removed, the recapitalization of the multilateral development banks, the changes in conditionality, and the use of the deposits of the all of the things that have already been mentioned. So I'm not going to go into all of those. Consider reimagining, which we heard about yesterday morning. Yeah, and I think there were two very critical ideas put forward. Jan Kregel talked about really bringing back the idea of the International Clearing Union in its original sense and handling that. And Prabhat Patnaik talked about the penalties for surplus countries, which would be a necessity for symmetric adjustment, both of which were very much part of the original ideas around having an international financial architecture at all. So I was thinking about how we put them together, and it struck me that these two ideas of Jan and Prabhat, they can't happen without capital controls. There's just no way. You can't even begin to conceive of them without very stringent capital controls. And that brought me back to thinking about why are we not talking about regulating finance? Because it's a precondition for everything else. Here we are trying to play around with an existing architecture in which the public institutions have to function in a world of ungoverned private finance. And it's a bit ironic because Jan and Leonardo and others were leading this whole charge about financial regulation a decade ago. Yeah, we were really, talking about how to re-regulate finance nationally, regionally, internationally. And I don't know whether we've lost that battle or we've said, okay, now we just, we lost. Okay, we lost it for sure. In practice, we lost it. But it's a battle, I think, that we have to fight. Because if we don't fight it, all the other stuff, even if we do all these changes, even if we do the minor changes in the architecture and in or the major changes in the architecture, this sheer force of private finance is just too large, too dramatic, too significant to actually enable the kinds of progressive changes we want to see. And that definitely is true at the national level. I mean, Lena has done a lot of work on that. So the kinds of, and it has all the implications that were mentioned yesterday at the last session. So how do we then combine those two? How do we think of an international financial architecture in which really there is a very strong role of regulation And who's going to do the regulation? Because that's the other problem. I mean, there are regulations that can be done nationally, which are obviously important. But let's face it, if the big guys don't agree, and we all know the big guys, then your own regulation will not have that much impact. So then we come back to how do we force those changes? Just like how do we force changes in the Bretton Woods institutions themselves? How do we force changes in international regulation? Notice, Jose Antonio, I'm not saying global, but international regulation that are somehow compatible with the better arrangements. So again, I mean, yes, Anastasia, maybe G20 should also be looking at that again as a thing that we have pushed in the back without confronting, because it's going to be there. I won't even call it the elephant in the room. We're all inside the belly of that elephant. So it's something that we have to actually confront. All right, so how do we then think of the ways in which we can do this? And I think, for a change, trying to be a bit more hopeful, that yes, we have to think of it in outside the multilateral framework, in a plurilateral framework. In other words, confront the multilateral with the plurilateral until the multilateral has no choice but to accept it. Let's put it that way, yeah? Because let's also admit that the Bretton Woods institutions are not going to change on their own, because as has already been very clearly mentioned also by Haihong, but by everyone, the big powers are not going to give up their voting shares, their quotas, their power, etc., just like that. They would only do that if they face irrelevance. Or if the world has moved on in such other ways that they really don't have significant power on that anymore. I think we also have to recognize that within that G7, I mean, there is a really deep loss of legitimacy, I believe, internationally, politically, of the G7. I think it was intensified during the COVID-19 pandemic when the double standards and the sort of the grabbing nationalism became so evident. But it's also reinforced by the double standards during the Ukraine war, the double standards for Gaza, which we haven't mentioned. I mean, I think it's notable that on Hiroshima Day, the G7 did not participate because Palestine was invited rather than Israel. I just want to mention that as one of the other indicators of a loss of global legitimacy. And here I will say global in terms of G7 powers. So in that context, okay, so we've got these formal arrangements. We've got the, all of the different arrangements that have been mentioned, and I'm not going to repeat those. But I think we have to recognize that all these informal arrangements happening. Yeah, I mean, you can call them informal. Haihong has mentioned the China's exchange rate swaps, which are actually huge. And you saw the cumulative amount, right? These are actually credit lines that are available. It actually has a significant impact, potentially a significant impact. We have a lot of new arrangements that are resulting from the sanctions that have been imposed by the new forms of protectionism and by the fear of protectionism. So, there was a discussion yesterday on the hegemony of the dollar, and, was pointed out that it's still very dominant. What was it, 54% of total trade and so much percent of total reserves. I think it's not the current level, but the direction of change. This is a dramatic decline from even 4 years ago, a really dramatic change in the share of global trade invoiced in dollars, in the share of global reserves held in US dollars. And all kinds of countries are shifting to other options. Gold is a very big and prominent one, but there are many other changes in the holding of reserves, but certainly in the financing of trade. And I think one of the things we haven't been looking at adequately is trade credit, which is, by the way, a really, really big deal. I mean, Andrew Cornford at UNCTAD had done some really excellent work on this in the past, but it's a big deal in terms of the current capacities of many countries to finance their imports. And that has changed dramatically. Largely, I would argue, because of the sanctions and protectionism. In other words, it's driven by G7 stupidity in this case. So we have to be looking at all of these different flows about the reserve holding, the swaps, the changes in payment systems. The fact that, you suddenly declare SWIFT is not okay for the Russians. They're forced to develop an alternative that has led the Chinese to develop their own alternative. And I'm pretty sure others are going to be either using the alternatives or developing their own. We have the possibilities enabled by central bank digital currencies, which also allows for different kinds of transactions and flows that we're not, I think, fully anticipating in terms of the implications that they could have for current financing, shall we say. Now, all of this, in a sense, will enable countries perhaps to do different kinds of regulation as well. I mean, I'm wondering, I'm just putting it out there, I don't know enough, and I think there are people in this room who know a lot more about it than me. Is it possible that these changes, combined with the technological changes that in the form of digital currencies, etc., will enable new forms of regulation that can be imposed by groups of countries, plurilaterally? I don't mean necessarily just one region. It doesn't have to be flour. It doesn't have to be Group of Africa alone. It could be combinations of countries. It could be the non-G7 group in the G20 even. Or it could be BRICS Plus, which now includes all those horrible oil exporting countries and so on. You know, so there are different possibilities, I think, emerging in terms of alternate financing arrangements, alternate trading arrangements that have been forced on people, which at the same time possibly allow new forms of regulation. So my basic point is we can't do anything we want without much more regulation of finance at every level. But maybe the potential for that regulation is now there in a way that wasn't before. And I'm very happy to say I finished ahead of time. Thanks.
Okay, good morning. Thanks, Chandru, for the invite. Thanks, Charles, for the invite. And I'm glad that I'm coming after you, Jayati, because I think I will more or less finish what you started. First, the question posed to us, to the panel, was, how can the Bretton Woods institutions be reformed? I will address it not as a technical question, not as an economics-related question, not even as an institutional building related question, but as a political question. And by doing that, I think I have a short answer for the question. Short answer. How can the Bretton Woods institutions be reformed? They can't. They cannot. Why? Because they were largely made in America, by Americans, for Americans, and they live in America. And after that, or furthermore, they are captured by powerful financial and others, and corporate lobbies. There are all kinds of lobbies over there. And by factions of the DC and Brussels bureaucracies. So apart from their dollar embeddedness, which is clearly a significant factor, these institutions do not benefit America, not even America, that much today. But make no mistake, they do benefit a lot, these lobbies. The lobbies are very grateful for them. They protect the creditors. Come on, let's not forget that. For these reasons, well, regrettably, real reform is not in sight. Patchwork reforms, maybe. Real reform is not. The US and Western European elites, they lack the interest, they lack the political will and the policy coordination to effectively address global governance reforms. So in that sense, this would be a very short presentation. I could end here. But fortunately, what I'm going to just give you the headlines is that a new Bretton Woods, to suggest that a new Bretton Woods is actually in the making. But there's a big difference, which is that it's not made in America, but mostly in Beijing and Shanghai. And we could start with a different date, but maybe 2001 will do. Why? Well, first, this is the evolution, the backbone of all that, the evolution of China's trade partnerships from 2000 to 2020. And you can see that if you take the red to be the communists, everybody turned communist from 2000 to 2020. And this is the Economist from last week. Even the Economist, which is not a great fan or friend of China, the cover is that Chinese business goes global, and goes global meaning global in the South. They're major inroads in the South. So let's take this as the backbone, okay? So let's go to 2001, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is founded and established by China and Russia, which is a political, economical, international security and defense organization. It promotes regional economic integration, trade, investment opportunities, development, etc., among member states, and also focuses on terrorism and separatism. The key words there is coordinated efforts, and intelligence sharing. Okay, what's the region? That small region over there is vast. It's vast and is largely unpopulated, and it has everything. Precious metals, oil, it's a new frontier, like the US frontier is a new frontier, ready to be conquered, and it is being conquered. Okay, next step, BRICS, founded in 2009, again, is an organization for economic cooperation, development. You all know who is there, but they're combined. Right now, they have 30% of world land, 45% of global population, and right now, with augmented BRICS, almost 30% of world GDP, okay? The augmented BRICS will probably, if not already, it's the foremost geopolitical rival to the G7 bloc. The G7 accounts for around 43, but it's shrinking, and the other side is growing. Let's take that, okay? So the BRICS are there, and this year, Malaysia has formally applied, and Turkey has expressed interest in joining. So that's not a small deal. That's a very huge deal in the making, okay? And then what happens in 2013? Well, Xi Jinping launched the Belt and Road Initiative, like a Silk Road economic belt, and the following month, October, the 21st Century Maritime. So that's where we got the Belt and Road Initiative, which is this one is global. It's going to enhance global trade. It's already doing it, and infrastructure connective. Plus, we have a third one, which is the digital Silk Road, which is also in the making, and it's wiring the world, and it's going to interact with these two. What is that? Well, this is bad, because it should come with not everything together. But the first map is the Belt and Road. You probably know about. It starts rightly in China and goes until Rotterdam, and yeah, no, yeah, no, in my computer it was working, but anyway, but what's important is the map in itself. It's in that region, in that vast region of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So it's a sort of Eurasian order in the making. So the Belt and Road is working that all that frontier out. And China has become the major lender for developing countries, with more than $1 trillion for development and for fixing debt sovereignty problems, especially in the African countries, but not only. And that's an interesting book with an interesting question. The Chinese version, the Belt and Road, is the Chinese version of the Marshall Plan. I think it's an interesting one. So in 2015, the new development, where's the money coming from? Okay, 2015, New Development Bank, or the BRICS Bank, it's in Shanghai, operates with a lot of financial instruments, including loans, guarantees, equity participation, bond issuance, blah, 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 to support public, private, and mixed projects. So that's it. Some highlights of its recent projects: Pará, São Paulo, Delhi, Beijing, Suez, and an issue of 6 billion bond from the bank. Okay. 16, the Asian, where's the money coming from? 16, the Asian Infrastructure Bank, which was established in Beijing, China, And what's the mission? Financing for development, financing for infrastructure and development. So the bank is supposed to be Asian, but it already has 100 approved members, not only from Asia, but from Europe, from Africa, and from the Americas, okay? That's just to enhance the beauty of the presentation, not the content. Some highlights of recent projects: India, Bangladesh, China, China, Asian, Philippines, and the Climate Act, just to give you a sense. Financial regulation, Jayati. Okay. While the West is always wanting to ban regulation, right? Next, first thing Trump will do when he gets there, it's going to be the crypto president, right? Crypto is banned from China. So that's where we are. Except in China, because last year, they revamped the whole financial regulation. They're creating the National Administration of Financial Regulation, which is sort of taking functions from the other regulatory agencies and has become a super regulation aiming to centralize financial oversight, close regulatory loopholes, and ensure comprehensive financial supervision at home and abroad, because the expansion of China is so huge that it needs financial regulation also. So this is not exactly a sort of an anti-regulation sort of setting or institutional setting. Most on the contrary. Financial infrastructure in the making. Okay, in the making, but they're there. The digital currency and the payment system. For now, do they make a difference? Not yet. But you look like everything in China, you look at those things now, they don't make much a difference. You look at them 10 years from now, and they are huge. So that's, again, the direction of travel. That's what really matters. So my conclusion is, do these initiatives, do they qualify as a new global economic architecture? No, because as was said, global governance, we lost. This is not going to happen, okay? And also an equally financial architecture should follow, but they qualify as a sort of geopolitical and geoeconomic order that is making huge advances, okay? This is going to be, for the financial architecture, it's probably not happening. It's going to be very difficult to happen, at least in the global. This is not happening. But as a regional or cross-continental way, this is already happening. That's the point. And an Eurasian financial architecture will surely happen. And this will be links, will have links with Middle East, with Africa and Latin America. So the political economy question here is, what is necessary to put the domestic political coalitions in place? Because if they are, they will have ample policy space for development strategies, and this not emerging, already there, non-neoliberal order. I think this is the great question. The great political economy question is this one. Thank you.
Thank you to the three speakers for three great presentations. We open now the floor for questions, queries, and comments. Okay, no, Marina was there and Jose Antonio.
I have a very straightforward, I didn't present myself. Marina Zucker-Marquez from Boston University. I have a very straightforward question on the role of reserves. We've been discussing how to adjust deficit and surplus countries, but we already have $12 trillion in foreign reserves, a lot of them on the balance sheets of developing countries. Recently, we wrote a proposition of, rechanneling, not only rechanneling SDRs to MDBs, but also rechanneling foreign reserves, a small portion of foreign reserves to multilateral development banks. But it seems on the SDRs and also from foreign reserves, it seems that there's a lot of resistance from central banks on how to participate, and they don't see themselves in the role of also promoting development. So how can we also make a better use of these huge foreign reserves that we have, and how, maybe it's a chicken and egg approach, because if you have a more stable financial system, maybe we'll need less reserves. But so how do you solve this puzzle? That's my question. Thank you.
Okay, I actually have a mixed question for the two of you, and one specifically for Leonardo. Let me put it this way, very straight way. The BRICS has achieved nothing. I don't see anything irrelevant. For example, there is no single proposal on international financial reform by the BRICS. Not the reform of the trade system, nothing. The only thing is the creation of the new development bank, but the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank is much larger. So my view, the BRICS have been a failure. That's my view. The second is actually on China. You both put China, of course. Whether the Leonardo's view that the new architecture. By the way, I am also American, so it's the USA, not America. This whole continent is America. So it was a proposal of the United States of America, USA. Anyway. No, my point about China is the capacity to integrate into the systems. Let me put it this way. For example, lending to Latin America by China has been a total failure. Very few countries, 50% went to Venezuela, which didn't pay. So the capacity of managing financing has been weak, to put it somehow. But also, even the Belt and Road Initiative has many failures. So how can and one thing in the debt restructuring process, China doesn't want to participate in the collective solutions. So how can China manage to be more integrated and more active in all of this area? The investment is working better. The foreign direct investment of China, I think, is working better than the other elements. And of course, in trade, which China is now #1 in the world.
Okay. No, I don't know whether we should only look at the problem which emanates from, virtually the metropolitan center, which is the IMF and the World Bank. Because supposing, everybody mentioned the Chiang Mai initiative. Why did the Chiang Mai initiative fail? It failed because of the fact that because of tensions between, Japan, China, etc., you've been unwilling to create for yourself a monitoring and surveillance mechanism, so that you actually said that we'll give the surveillance role to the IMF, that you get a little bit of money from the Chiang Mai initiative, and in order to be able to get that amount of money, you already have to be part of an IMF program. So when the 97 crisis occurred, people said, why should we go to the Chiang Mai initiative? Let's just go straight to the Federal Reserve and the IMF. And the same thing with the contingent reserve arrangement, which came as part of the BRICS and so on. The same thing. Surveillance is with the IMF. So there is something at the other end, that the inability, because of geopolitical tensions among countries, say Japan and China, to a certain extent among BRICS countries, India and China, etc., you don't want to put your money and give the other person a role in surveillance, I mean, the other country, and you actually therefore transfer it to the IMF. So I'm just wondering whether that is also a problem which needs to be resolved for this architecture.
Okay, I'm a bit worried that we're getting focused too much on the trees and we're missing the forest. So I'm going to try and go back to the forest and recalculate the problems that we have in terms of these particular changes. Start out point number one, if we look at the difference between private and public sector interventions, in the private sector, in general, we have bankruptcy laws, and the private sector, when it takes any action, always has a bottom line, which says that you don't lose everything. So you can risk everything, but you don't lose everything, but we're going to keep you stable. In terms of the public sector, what happens, and this is in part response to what Jayati was talking about in terms of regulation. When we're looking at regulation, we have a principle that rules, and I'm going back to the principle I started with yesterday, is that the public sector, by definition, should never take a loss. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means basically that anything that the public sector does in terms of regulation and in terms to improve the system is always subject to the constraint that it does not provide a deficit in government financing. The budget always has to balance. Now, I'm going to give you 3 or 4 examples of regulations which were set up in order to improve the behavior of the system and ended up producing precisely the positive. This is sort of the law of unintended consequences. The proposals which I mentioned yesterday for this International Investment Board came initially from Hansen, and Hansen used the example of the FHA, the Federal Housing Administration in the United States. This was set up by the Roosevelt administration to do what? To provide cheap housing for poor people. It was given to an administrator who administered the program and discovered that if he was going to do it without making losses that increased the deficit on the federal budget, what did he have to do? He created redlining. He did not lend to poor people because poor people could not pay back. So the Roosevelt administration FHA program generated the red line that discriminates against low-income individuals in housing. Okay? Why? Because he was afraid that the Congress would eliminate the program if it generated a loss. You had to balance the budget. If you look at the Bretton Woods institution, it's the same thing. Bretton Woods, IMF, does not take a loss. Why? Because no government that puts in money believes that it's going to lose money on this. So what happens? Basically, the IMF works on the principle of a balanced budget. The countries who borrow have to pay it back. And in order to do that, they have to adjust their external account. And they adjust that external account by going back into fiscal balance. Point 2. Point 3, if we look at this crisis of subprime lending, securitization. Securitization was created, why? Because in the 1980s, the US had a very large financial crisis, which was solved by imposing capital ratios on the banks. How do you set up capital ratios? Well, what happened was that they generated comfort letters. Comfort letters were what? It said that we're going to meet any losses that you have so that you can count this as part of your capital ratio. Then we developed what? Credit default swaps. Credit default swaps do what? Credit default swaps are a way in which you meet your capital ratios. So the idea of making the banks stronger by making them hold more capital generated the fact that in general produced that difference. And again, this was a question of not having to have a expenditure, of not having the government meet the losses that were being generated. You could go on from that, the Job Act, Section 44 lending, which now produces the venture capital funds, the private equity funds, the SEC funds. These are all done on exactly the same basis. These are ways of avoiding the government taking losses in providing particular types of regulatory programs. So, as Jayati said, we don't pay much attention to regulation anymore, but the problem is that we have to pay attention that the kinds of regulations that we're using implies that the government is going to be willing to take losses in providing supports to the efficiency and the operation of the system. And as long as we believe in balanced budgets, that's never going to happen.
Thank you very much. We're going to give a chance to the speakers to answer questions, and we're going to go to a second round. Can you make your answers, please, concise and brief? Thank you.
We need the mic.
Okay, my friend, Jose Antonio, you're complaining about the inefficiency of the BRICS and etc. Inefficiency of the BRICS in terms of lending, etc., etc. Okay, well, I would say give it a chance, because the inefficiency of the BRICS is a new one. It's from 2009. You want to go back to an 80 years inefficiency? So I don't think it's a good proposition. Number two, they are this. Let me call it this. The Beijing-Shanghai based order, at least is worried about development, infrastructure, and things like that. What about IMF and the World Bank? What they are worried about? Protecting the creditors. Are they interested in really the global south or things like that? You yourself said that they are not. Everybody in this room said that they are not. So we're talking about a set of institutions that are in the making, and they have, well, Beijing has a strategy which the West does not have. The financial sector does. BlackRock is all over the place, including Ukraine. And so we want to go back to that? What for?
I insist, the BRICS have done nothing. I mean, I really think so. I really think so. I mean, what have they achieved? I mean, the New Development Bank, which is more a Chinese initiative than the BRICS initiative, is headquartered in China. So China is among the success of China is the African Investment Bank, Infrastructure Investment Bank, and the New Development Bank. So that's Chinese initiative. So the Chinese part is correct. Your BRICS part is totally incorrect. They have achieved nothing. And I don't see any initiative really from the BRICS.
No, I just, okay. No, Professor Antonio, I've just went to the headquarters of BRICS, NDB, this is really international one, truly international one. NDB is okay. And they do have a contagion reserve arrangement. It's okay. It's already established. Okay, so are you happy now? Right, okay. Anyway, so talking about the central bank, resist a little bit to the idea of this SDR. I think because holding SDR is really, there's a cost. It's not cost-free. So this is something that's very, very practical. And I think that could be a major, obstacle if you want to push this idea further, because eventually, the SDRs are on the balance sheet of the central banks. If they don't want to pay, then nothing happens. So this is correct. I mean, this is really something we need to follow. BRI, I'm not expert on BRI, I'm sorry. I think in this room, there are, Marina is an expert, and of course, Liu Yefeng, there's a huge person over there. She's gonna give you a very good answer maybe tomorrow. But anyway, BRI, is how many years already? Several years. It's not You cannot complain without any reason, right? So anyways, I think we are basically, there are a lot of discussions. China is a new lender. This is really, really different. And okay, this is excuse. You can ask me, this is excuse. But anyway, there is a disagreement on the public, because what type of the lender, is it public or private? Because China is quite a little bit different. This is really, really fundamental debate. And of course, China focuses on development. It's kind of, if you invest and you focus on, the development, its purpose is a little bit further or longer. I'm not sure whether, I'm not expert, but anyway, just my feeling that is there a disagreement about the debate. And then Sima initiative, very quick. Yeah, you're right. Conditionality is a headache for ASEAN +3 because, because of this, the Asian countries are so angry about with the IMF during the financial crisis. But now they work on their own conditionality, with more flexibility, more, specifies for the region. So which is really good. Political element, true. Nowadays, it's more apparent. Before, no. China and Japan was on really good term in the beginning. What else? Okay, I'll stop.
Yeah, I think all of these really will have to continue over coffee. But just also reserves, Marina, remember many of the countries that hold a lot of reserves, like India, it's all borrowed reserves in the Indian case. It's not current account surpluses that have been translated into reserves. So you have to look at different countries and the nature of their reserves in terms of their willingness to be more involved in that. Yeah, you're right, Chandru, about the Chiang Mai initiative, and you're right that the geopolitical concerns continue. But I really do believe the world has, first of all, already changed and is changing. I mean, I don't want to overplay the impact of sanctions, protectionism, etc., but I don't think we can ignore that. And especially when you can be told tomorrow that your payment system is not okay with us, or you're not allowed into our payment system. I think that does change matters. And I think, I really think we're not looking enough at trade credit, which has changed dramatically in the last 2 years. And we should be looking at those to see, well, maybe people are just working out different kinds of arrangements without necessarily bringing it to even a regional institution. Jan, this is a very interesting part. I didn't know that there was a kind of regulation that forces the US public sector to always have a budgetary balance. And it kind of, maybe I'm being very stupid. What's with their big fiscal deficit then? Yes, but that debt ceiling and the usual drama over that. But let's face it, the US has a huge deficit and it keeps growing. So it's not. Yeah, no, I think what you're absolutely correct about is the completely dysfunctional nature of the US system, which is why I'm suggesting that.
Okay, Germany.
Mike.
No, this is not only the U.S. system. I mean, you can't blame budget balancing on the U.S. Congress. I mean, this is again, back yesterday to our globalist friends, okay, to ensuring that what you're doing is protecting, and what you're protecting is the wealth, and that's the way you do that is by preventing any losses to accrue to the people who hold wealth. And it comes through the Congress in approving. I mean, all of these regulations are things which went through Congress. They got through Congress how? Because you could either prove or promise that they would not have a negative impact on the budget, okay? And all I'm pointing out is that there is a meta explanation of all of these things, and that is that in order to do any of the things we're talking about here, somehow or other you're going to have to go back to Congress and convince them that none of these changes will require any net contribution to the losses that have to be funded. And the problem is now every time you look up into the sky, there are losses raining down on you, and somebody has to cover them. Unless we get a means of cooperating across countries in bearing those losses, we're just all going to drown.
Thank you. It's 11:15. We have the coffee break. I suggest that the persons that had questions, because okay, well there are 4 questions that I saw before. There's one person that was here, 2 people on my right, and one on the at the back. Okay, Can you make it very quick, please? One question or one comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. I find demoralizing but interesting this idea of the Bretton Woods institutions can't be reformed and putting the emphasis in summer institutions with China or the BRICS as the main characters. My doubt has to do with if the policy space that those institutions could give to peripheral countries would be much different than the ones that today the IMF or the the institutions we have today have, or if as the pattern of specialization and commerce between China and Latin American countries at least has to do like the traditional center periferia pattern. What is the why would China let those countries develop, or why wouldn't be China the new ladder kicker if it benefits from that pattern that has to do a lot with the traditional center periferia pattern of commerce? Pedro.
There's one question. There's one here, and then one in front of me, and then will be one in the back, and that's it.
Thank you so much. The discussion about BRICS has... Oh, yes, I'm Ana Garcia from the Federal Rural University, BRICS Policy Center, T20 with Haihong. So very briefly, the discussion around BRICS has been really interesting. We could discuss it further. But it has to do with my question, firstly to Haihong. Following the BRICS since its beginning, I get the impression, once I got the chance to tell you this, but we couldn't discuss it, that in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, the main purpose of the BRICS was exactly the common objective of the BRICS for the formation of BRICS was to reform the international financial architecture in general, but particularly the IMF. This was the main focus on BRICS in these first years. And with the time, and as the reform didn't come, we had in 2014 the creation of the New Development Bank, together with the occupation of Crimea from Russia. And this was, for me, a turning point when BRICS started to be a geopolitical coalition. And now, no question about that. So I have the impression that China kind of has given up the effort to really reform the IMF and has put a lot more effort in building new institutions, coalitions, initiatives. Am I correct in that? Does China still puts effort in really reforming those institutions built under US power, hegemony, etc., or does China really now wants to put more effort in new institutions where China can have more voice and more power? And very briefly to the others, I loved Leonardo's presentation, but also going back to the idea of reimagining institutions that Professor Gosh just brought. The institutions created by BRICS and others, they're very seductive in the way of being a global South institutions, but what they finance, the effects of the projects could be and are, and many times, more or less the same as the Bretton Woods institutions when they finance big infrastructural projects, big hydroelectric dams, roads in the middle of indigenous lands and territories, big power plants in the middle of quilombolas territories. The effects of those projects are more or less the same. So the reimagination of what the Global South can do is more important than exactly the limitations and the economic power of these institutions. So just a general comment on that.
Can you give the mic to the person sitting next to you? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentations. My name is Yuefeng Li. I would just like to comment on the BRICS. I think, first of all, as you said just now, at the beginning of the setting up of the BRICS, the intentions, objectives were different. But with the increasing geopolitical tension, the coherence within the BRICS has been decreasing dramatically. So it is very difficult for the BRICS to really achieve major reforms for the reform of global financial architecture or for other things. In particular, right now, there is the pressure for the BRICS also to take side on this thing. And also for New Development Bank. From the very beginning, it said it cannot replace IMF. It has no intention to replace IMF, and its capital is tiny. It's a fraction of the IMF, and its contingency instrument has not really been used right now. So I had a meeting recently. The discussion was how to trigger the utilization of the contingency arrangements within the NDB. AIIB also has problems. So right now, they have good instruments and arrangements, but they lack of capacity and lack of cohesiveness, and there's too much diversity right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's one question in the back, Farwa, that was waiting. And then after that, we're going to give a chance the speakers. Oh, okay, him. And then we're going to give a chance to the speakers to finish very quick and then go to the coffee break. Go ahead, Farwa.
Yeah, thank you very much. The presentations were really, really interesting. And I also have a... Okay.
Can you identify yourself,
Yes,
please?
my name is Farwa Sial, and yeah, thank you very much. The presentations were really, really interesting, but I just wanted to also share my disappointment because this is the second day of the workshop, and somehow we keep equating China with, let's just say, the G7 countries, whereas I don't think there is an equation, considering that China's going out strategy and the whole infrastructure push came just in the late 1990s or the 2000s. So I think that sort of eliminates the colonial history that a lot of developing countries still are dealing with, of course, with ongoing methods of imperialism. So on that thing, the other point here, of course, is the problem that China's engagement in countries is not ad hoc or in isolation from existing frameworks and existing integration of these countries in the global financial architecture. So whenever points are being made, I think maybe there's a need to be careful about the continuation, the different trajectory, and what is possible given that the time limitation is very less. Of course, acknowledging the failures, but also being very conscious of the fact that 1,000 years of imperial history cannot change with one injection of finance for these countries. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. One more question here.
Thank you to the panelists for a lively presentation. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciated quite a few of these ideas which came up, especially Jayati's framing of the whole discourse we've heard so far in terms of either reforming or reimagining. I think both, depending on which way we look at it, I think we would sort of tend to go in a slightly different direction. So with regard to Leonardo's presentation, I just wanted to ask, I completely agree with you that your point you made about the Bretton Woods institutions being for America, and therefore there are certain kinds of baggages which come with that. And you rightly pointed to the beginnings of a new Bretton Woods with China. Now, would you perhaps agree that the problem, if one could say there's a problem, is that it is again a Bretton Woods kind of an imaginary with China instead of the US at the center, and is that going to be something which we could sort of reform away or reimagine in a different way? Because this seems to be more of an effect of geopolitical changes which are leading to this new Bretton Woods kind of a scenario, rather than what we've been talking about in terms of a more democratic, kind of a setup, more voice for the global south countries? Are those kinds of elements likely to be there at all, even in this new Bretton Woods? And if not, what kind of an efficacy could we expect from that? Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to give the floor now to the panelists. Jayati.
You know, honestly, I'm going to wait to hear everybody else because I think you've all made actually terrific points. I really don't have much to add, so I'm going to pass.
Okay, very quick, just response to Anna's point. Yes, we need a lot of evidence to support this, speculations. Definitely, theoretically it works. If you have alternatives, you have a pressure, or for reforms, for existence to reform itself. So this is really happened during the time of 2016. You can check the events. The RMB included in SDR, and then when other things happened within the IMF. But anyway, this is something, more alternatives, maybe more chances to reform the existing ones.
Okay, I got the bulk of them. Okay, first one, China. Oh, is China trustable? No, nobody's trustable, okay? But China has some advantages, the way I see it. One is this, who else is doing investment in infrastructure on a global scale? Nobody. China is there doing that. So this is already happening. So the idea behind it is not difficult to grasp. It's a positive sum game. Everybody gains. When the cake gets bigger, everybody gets a bigger slice. This is not difficult. It seems to be difficult when you are financialized completely. Then it gets tricky. But if you're not, it's not a difficult, the basic idea of Keynesian economics, maybe, okay? What else? Very important. China is not lecturing the world. It's not saying you have to become more Chinese. The US is doing that. And finally, I recall something that, of all people, Larry Summers, the king of deregulation, etc., a quote from him. He was saying that he was talking to an, I don't know, to an Asian or African friend, high on the policy-making level, and he was saying, well, when we talk to the Chinese, we get an airport. When we talk to you, the US, we get a lecture. So yes, in that sense, I think that if I would have to bet, I would bet on that side. Do I trust it? No. The second one, strategy, right? They have a strategy. They have a, that's the point. Like, the lady over there said, well, maybe you should pay more attention, or be more careful with the whole moving parts. Yeah, I agree. I only had 15 minutes. I would have paid much more attention having more time. But what I wanted to highlight was the fact that, well, we have to look at this new order, which is already happening. And it is a different order because investment strategy is at its core. So it's a non-neoliberal order. So what do you make of that? What do we make of that? It's up to us. It's up to our domestic political elites. Does this order, do they have incentives for others to join? I would say sure, because they're making investment, the markets are growing. If you look at China, on almost every aspect, China is or is becoming the number one. So are there incentives in terms of making money? I would say obviously so. In terms of integration, yes, as well. So it's not difficult. And what about the West? What about the US right now? What's the strategy? Permanent wars. What's the basic idea? We're running the world. The last interview of Joe Biden, oh, I'm the guy who's running the world. We're the essential nation. So I don't like that. So if I trust the other side, no, but I'm willing to bet. Anything else? That's it. Okay, coffee break. Thank you.